Hey there, I'm Nicole. Welcome back. Today is the kickoff of a fun series that I'm going to be doing for June that I'm calling Idea to Outline. So this is based off of the concept that I find it really hard when I have an idea to take it from the idea stage to the stage where I actually have an actionable thought of what the story is going to be, who the characters are, and I'm able to start writing it. And there are a lot of steps, I believe, to get to before to get from that idea to the outline. Okay, so I think that John Truby's Anatomy of Story is an excellent resource for going from a little tiny spark, or not even a spark, going from nothing to an outline. That is what this book is. So over the course of June, I will be reading this book and doing this process for my own book and sharing it with you in the hopes that it gives you ideas for things that you can do. Maybe it shows you whether or not you want to buy this book and follow this book, things that you never want to do ever. Hopefully it'll be helpful and fun. I'm just going to talk through a couple ideas so we can think about how different ideas come to us and what the different idea categories there are. The story that I just finished writing was called 1837. That story idea came from hiking in Wales, where I thought it would be really cool to have characters in a forest like this one, an action-adventure type story. That turned into an origin story for the Evil Queen and Snow White, where I got my three main characters, and then eventually, over 2 years, I transplanted them to Upper Canada 1837. So the initial idea and the end thing were not at all connected, but we got there eventually. It worked. So another idea, I have a pirate story that I've talked about on here. I'm pretty sure that idea literally just came from me being like, I feel like I want to write about pirates. The project that's going to be the basis of this series is my project musical, which came from the concept of I like stories about people in high school or otherwise who are putting on plays and or musicals. How about I write one of those? And that is the idea. So that gives us a whole lot of different ideas and thoughts of where a story starts. A story can start with the actual main center of action. It can start with a character, it can start with an image, it can start with a dream, it can start with a place, it can start with just a concept of a genre. I want to try writing in a mystery genre. So I'm going to start in chapter 1 with the premise. Step 1. I've already done some of this. Step 1 is write something that may change your life. And they ask you to do 2 exercises. Write down your wish list, everything you would like to see up on the screen in a book or at the theater. So I kind of did this before I got to this video because I do know what I'm writing, but my initial idea for this book was I really love stories about teenagers who are in high school and they're putting on a play and or a musical. How about I write one of those? So that is what I came from that exercise. I also think it can be very helpful to do the opposite and write what you do not like to see in stories, which is what I did for this story, and I'm gonna read my very short list of what is not happening in this book. Creativity loves constraints. I think this is a good idea. Supplemental resource. Okay. No deliberate sabotage, no crazy kegger parties, no last minute going on stage to save the day, no football players, cheerleaders, or anything of the sort. I went to an art school. We did not have football players. We did not have cheerleaders. So I, A, don't know anything about that. And B, it always seems, when I read stories that have that, I'm like, that seems artificial. That wasn't what my experience was like. And I don't think that all experiences in high school are like that, sports dominated. Anyways, no blatant mean girls. The main character is not going to fall in love and no one is getting divorced. Those are my rules. The next step they said is to write a premise list. This is a list of every premise you've ever thought of. I'm not doing that. I already know what premise I'm working on. Step number 2 is look for what's possible. So this is about exploring possibilities to see if anything is promised by my idea. Some ideas generate certain expectations, ask what if, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is a story about putting on a musical or play. It's going to be a play. I wrote YA theater novel. So in a YA theater novel, there's certain things that are promised. Obviously, you're going to go from like auditions to the actual performance. So there must be a performance. If it's in a high school, there has to be students involved. There has to be some trouble over the production. There has to be like a faculty member. And inherently in this idea, there is the genre of performance, the story grid genre performance. It's a performance genre story. So I'm going to be pulling out the old story grid performance. When I was thinking about that, sort of what's possible, there's also like, why are they putting on a musical? It's an art school. I kept thinking about it and I was like, who's going to be directing this? What's going to be going on? I decided I wanted my main character to direct it. Why would a main character direct a musical? Well, maybe it's because there is a competition where they choose 2 or 3. I haven't decided yet. I think it's going to be 3 student directors every year to put on a full-length play. A little bit far-fetched, maybe, but we'll just pretend that this school has a very large budget. And there's a competition to like go to a play festival or something. So those are the things that are promised by the idea. I have quite a few pages of sort of what is promised, what could happen. I wrote down the external genre, which is performance, the internal genre, which I've decided is redemption. And I have other things in here, like the tone that I want. What's promised by a YA theater story? It's funny and lighthearted with a beautiful heart. There's going to be friendships. There's going to be conflict between the actors and the director. And that basically brings me to the end of my exploring the story idea. So generally, all of these steps were done over a really long time. I did do them over a few months. I've realized that somewhere in there, I missed the part where you're actually writing a premise, which I did. It took me quite a few iterations, but I'm going to read it for you. When a once-beloved student returns to her art school after a mysterious absence, she must prove herself and beat out her rivals by directing the best show the school has ever seen. Bum, bum, bum. Might not be your cup of tea. It is definitely mine. This is a story that I would love to read. Which brings me to step number 3, identify the story challenges and problems. I haven't done this yet. I'm going to do this now. So I came up with a list of challenges and problems for my story. There are probably more. I might think about this. I might think about this a little bit more, but they are: the main character is a kid, so she doesn't have complete autonomy over what she's doing, which limits her ability to be like super performative. You must make a directing competition of full-length shows realistic. That's just a technicality, me knowing how school budgets work. Hide the reason for the need for redemption from the audience for a little bit. How do you get people interested in the performance nature, like the actual putting on of the show, without getting too technical into the putting on of the show? Creating real conflict in a story that isn't cartoonish or superficial. How do you make the audience care about whether a show succeeds or not, whether it wins a prize or not? Those are my couple of challenges that I'm thinking about. Now, the designing principle is unique to the anatomy of story. I haven't really heard it anywhere else. I'm just going to read a little bit about what it says because it's kind of an interesting idea. So, given the problems and promises inherent in your idea, you must now come up with an overall strategy for how you will tell your story. Your overall strategy, stated in one line, is the designing principle of your story. It is what organizes the story as a whole. It is the internal logic of the story, what makes the parts hang together organically so that the story becomes greater than the sum of its parts. It is what makes the story original. So designing principle equals story process plus original execution. And they have a few examples. For example, Harry Potter. Premise: a boy discovers he has magical powers and attends a school for magicians. Designing principle: a magician learns to be a man and a king by attending a boarding school for sorcerers over the course of 7 school years. A Christmas Carol. When 3 ghosts visit a stingy old man, he regains the spirit of Christmas. Designing principle: trace the rebirth of a man by forcing him to view his past, his present, and his future over the course of one Christmas Eve. It's a Wonderful Life. When a man prepares to commit suicide, an angel shows him what the world would have been like had he never been born. And then the designing principle is express the power of the individual by showing what a town and a nation would be like if one man had never lived. So I have to kind of figure out what my designing principle is. Okay, so I thought a little bit, again, I've been thinking about the designing principle for a while. It's just hard to like nail it down. So I think I know what it is. Originally I was thinking like, give a very young director a redemption plot, because you usually think of redemption stories. When I think of redemption stories, I think of, what's it called? I think of A Christmas Carol and grumpy old men. But this one's going to be like a young, blonde, teenage girl. But I don't think that's my designing principle. So another one that I came up with was express the importance and power of the arts by tying the success of a show explicitly to a young girl's redemption. And that's kind of what I'm doing, but sort of also not. So I finally got to the final one, which is a little bit different. I'm going to call it the epistolary style, but I don't know 100% if that's what I'm doing. I kind of have to look up that term to be sure, but let's just go with it. Use the epistolary style to trace how a young girl's direction of Antony and Cleopatra at her high school changes how she and the other students in her school are viewed. So, I almost like expressing the importance of the arts by tying the success explicitly to the girl's redemption. Basically, I'm trying to tie how she is viewed, because she has like a past. She made a mistake. The main character's name is Charlotte, by the way, or Char. Everyone calls her Char. And the year before, the school has a very reputable and elitist, I suppose, not elitist, but like much admired choir. And she was in this choir, and she was going through some things, and she kind of choked when she had a very important solo. It wasn't just like for parents, it was a professional event that they were getting paid for. And she was put on suspension from the choir. And then she went and she kind of freaked out, and she shoplifted, and she got caught. And she then left the school. She messed up at the Christmas concert, so she was gone for the entire rest of the year. I guess she finished up her exams in January or whatever, and then she was gone for the entire rest of the year. Her parents are like kind of kooky academics. Not kooky, but they're academics, and she has 2 older brothers, and they were like, she did what she had to do to sort of make up for the shoplifting. She had community service or something like that, and then they ended up taking her on this world trip where she was visiting all of these different countries, and it just has to do with their parenting philosophy. Anyway, she comes back, and she's very like not crazy about high school, and like not interested in what is going on beyond like the artistic stuff. And she comes back, she enters this she applies to be a director in this competition. I've decided that there's going to be 2 directors, her and this guy, and she's going to decide that she really wants to direct Antony and Cleopatra, because it is about kind of like passion versus discipline, and she's going to make it a lot about like how a woman is viewed, how people in general are viewed, and how, you know, public perception differs from what's actually happening, and all these sorts of things. So I'm trying to tie what people think of her to the work that she's doing on whoever she ends up getting to play. Use the performance of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra in a 21st century school to explore how women's emotions, skills, and image can be, that's the part I'm not entirely sure what we're exploring yet. It's really just to explore those things like politics and image and what you're really feeling versus what you're showing and what you're doing, and how there's so much misconstruction and how there's so much influence in what people think of women versus men, even if they're doing the same things. Like that kind of theme is what we're going to get there. I haven't been able to narrow that down to an actual statement, but basically we're using the performance of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra in a 21st century school, directed by a girl who is looking for redemption to explore feminism. There we go. Let's go with that. That's my designing principle. Whew, that was a lot of work. The next step is determine your best character. Whew, glad I got that out of the way. It's Charlotte, so we don't have to go too much more into that one. And I think I'm gonna stop there for today because that took a really long time to come up with that designing principle, even though it's kind of not perfect yet, but that's all right. Things evolve. And I will keep going forward on step 6 in the next video in this series. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.